Okay, you guys have had a little bit of time to look at this, to look over the Dear Warner Brothers letter from Groucho Marx, right? I have shared a video of Groucho Marx from a clip from the Horse Feathers movie, so you can kind of get an idea where these guys are coming from. A place of comedy, right? It's funny. You've read the piece and you have gone through and used your close analysis weapons, annotating, questioning strategies, or talking with the text, graphic organizer. And now we're just going to talk about some of the things that you guys have come up with for, your graphic organizer, how you've laid out the most important details to answer the question, how does Marx use word choice, tone, and choice of details to emphasize his purpose, which is why Warner Brothers cannot claim exclusivity on the name Casablanca. So we understand that part of what precipitated this letter that Marx wrote was the exigence, this long and ominous letter saying that they could not use the name Casablanca in their upcoming comedy movie because Warner Brothers already had a movie called Casablanca and they were trying to lay claim to that name, exclusively saying it was theirs. Casablanca just means White House in Spanish, right? So that's your context. And you know a little bit about your speaker because he's a comedian. Okay, I just always like to start out talking about, thinking about the way a piece is organized. I like to, whether I'm analyzing a piece of music or a film or an essay, I like to look at, the general structure of it. How do they introduce the idea? So in this piece, he starts out with a statement of his reason for writing. Okay, he introduces the context, and it's a lawsuit, right? The next thing he does is he gives this sort of silly anecdote about the made up, fake Warner Brothers family history. Then he uses this ridiculous, then there's an analogy. Comparing Harpo, the star of Casablanca, the Marx Brothers movie, and Ingrid Bergman, who was the beautiful actress who starred in the Warner Brothers Casablanca. He goes on to this ridiculous, then there's some rhetorical questions. More ridiculous analogies. And with allusions. Brother, can you spare a dime became brother, can you spare a dime? Because that's spreading the dime pretty thin to divide it up between more than one brother, right? That's we'll talk a little bit about the effect of that. Also, the can you claim the name Jack? What about Jack and the Beanstalk? What about Brothers Karamazov? He gives all these other allusions to history, literature, where the words brothers or Jack or Harry have been used before, right? And he goes several he plays on words, And then he has this conclusion where he uses language like ferret-faced shyster lawyers who must have come up with this idea. Okay? All right, so this is what I see as his structure here. Let me see if we're on camera. Yes. Okay. And if you notice, and we've seen this before, as he continues with his argument, his argument that it seems to devolve or decay into just utter ridiculousness. And we've talked about this before in terms of Dr. Raina Green's speech, where she's proposing this museum for Plains white people. It's this Latin expression, ad ridiculi ad absurdum, where his argument sort of degrades into just like ultimate absurdity, right? And what is the effect of that? What's the logic in doing that, right? How can we tie this ad absurdum back to our logic? What is the logic in doing that? All right. What were in the introduction, in the context, what were some words that he used there to sort of capture his overall feeling about this lawsuit? What words specifically capture his tone?
He said, I had no idea the city of Casablanca belonged exclusively to Warner Brothers.
Right. I had no idea, you know. All right. It belonged exclusively to you. I didn't know it was yours. Right? There's sort of this tone of disbelief. Anything else in there that helps to? What about in the questioning strategies? What about this qualifier? Apparently. It's a qualifier. Why does he begin? Apparently. Does that sound like a super formal way to start a letter? Apparently. Yeah, there's an informality there. And it also doesn't leave a whole lot of room for argument, right? Apparently, like it's apparent to anybody with eyes and ears that this is kind of ridiculous, right? What other words in that last sentence help to capture his tone? That we received what kind of letter, Amelia? What do you say?
Ominous.
Yes, a long and ominous letter. Which establishes that sort of, we get his tone from that, which is, what is his tone? What would be a good adjective to describe the way he feels about it?
I guess he thinks it's ridiculous.
Okay. His tone is kind of like, it's ridiculous, and his tone is just sort of, perplexed, confused. And that's important in the end when you look at his conclusion, right? About the ferret-faced shyster lawyers, where, he kind of brings his argument full circle. But before that, what were some of what's the effect of the silly anecdote about his family, you know, coming there with the shepherd, with the shepherd's hook, the alpenstock, who sold, his great-great-grandfather who sold Burbank for 100 shares of common. You guys saw what Harpo Marx looks like. Ingrid Bergman, you can imagine she was the illustrious, beautiful actress that starred in Casablanca. Is anybody can confuse a beautiful actress with that curly-headed, sort of silly clown-looking dude from the film clip that I showed you? No. Okay. All right. So this is, you know, especially when you talk about the audience, you know, you get the idea that this letter was not just for the Warner Brothers to look at. This letter was published in the newspaper so everybody could read it, right? So the audience is going to, you know, 1930s audience would chuckle at this comparison. Because it's like comparing the most beautiful woman in the world to Bozo the Clown, right? Ingrid Bergman was just a huge Hollywood actress at the time. Okay, any other of those, what effect do those rhetorical questions have? You claim you own Casablanca and that no one else can use that name without your permission. What about Warner Brothers? Do you own that too? You probably have the right to the name Warner, but what about Brothers? Professionally, we were brothers long before you were. We were touring the Styx as the Marx Brothers when Vitaphone was still a gleam in the inventor's eye. And even before we had other brothers, the Smith Brothers, Brothers Karamazov, Don Brothers, an outfielder for Detroit, Brother Can You Spare a Dime, which was originally Brothers Can You Spare a Dime, but was spreading a dime pretty thin, so they threw one brother out and gave all the money to the other one. Whittled it down to Brother Can You Spare a Dime. So the question sets up these analogies and allusions, and what is the effect? Brothers Karamazov is a famous Russian novel. Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? And the Detroit ball player. What does this have for our 1930s audience in general? These are all going to be names that they what? They would recognize these names, right? And so the audience is going to sort of be in on the joke that this is ridiculous to try. He can't claim, you know, he's making an interesting comparison here. You know, the point is, you know, you can't lay claim on words in this way, right? Because by using all of these very common household names, and I know we have to kind of think because we don't know all the allusions and stuff. How does this help his purpose? What is his purpose again? Is he's trying not to get sued, right? So they can use the name A Night in Casablanca in their comedy movie, right? They're, you know, and so in his conclusion, there's this sort of play on words that is, you know, or where his conclusion, what he really does, his purpose in his conclusion is to create a us versus them scenario, right? Surely you didn't come up with this idea, Jack. We're all buddies here. We're all brothers. We're all in this together. I'm sure it was some ferret-faced shyster lawyer. What is the connotation of those words? Is it polite?
No.
It's not polite at all, okay? But he's given him an out, right? He gives him an out. It's us versus them. You know, don't let these lawyers drive this wedge between us as business partners and friends and brothers, you know. And so that ties into my purpose here, you know. So what I want you guys to do is to come up with a good thesis statement and decide which of the analogies. He gives so many ridiculous analogies, rhetorical questions, silly anecdotes, and allusions that you can't use them all. So you have to kind of decide which ones you're going to use. So how does Marx use word choice, tone, and choice of detail to emphasize why Warner Brothers cannot claim exclusivity on the name Casablanca? You know, I'm thinking of Marx uses playful, fun and playful, or let's say fun and humorous. Fun, humorous, word choice and plays on words with plus increasingly ridiculous anecdotes, analogies, and allusions to emphasize why Warner Bros. Cannot lay claim on the name Casablanca. Right? So this is sort of an example of a thesis statement that you could use here. And in my essay, I would imagine that I would see, you know, reference to plays on words, the ridiculous anecdote, an analogy, and allusion. You know, the structure is increasingly ridiculous anecdotes. There's a logic to that, because as he this increasingly ridiculous anecdotes, that logic in doing that, like as hopefully his plan is that when Jack Warner gets to the end of this letter, Jack is also what? What is his emotional state at that point? What's he going to be doing? You think he's going to be super hot under the collar, is the intention, or is he going to be laughing?
He's probably gonna be mad.
Hopefully he's laughing. And in laughing, he's like, okay. And he sees that, yes, maybe Groucho Marx is correct, and this is kind of a ridiculous
But
lawsuit.
he could find it as like mocking though.
Okay, so it could backfire, and he could find it highly offensive, couldn't he? Okay. All right, so there is something too. You have to consider your audience in that, right? All right.
So on the essay Friday, is there like a structure, like how many paragraphs, or does it not matter?
Okay, that's a great question. I would think that you would have to have a minimum of 3 paragraphs, right? Introduction, where you start out broad, give them the context, give your thesis that resembles this, and then your body paragraph has your specific examples of the plays on words and the increasingly ridiculous tone, and then conclusion, where you restate your thesis and give some sort of compelling, sophisticated final analysis. I like to set my essays up in at least 4 paragraphs, where I have attention to my introduction, thesis. Then I have, I like to focus on structure first and how that contributes to the tone. Then I like to get into the specifics of the specific plays on words and the specific anecdotes and allusions that he uses that really drives that tone home. So I'm getting more, I'm starting broad and getting more and more focused in specific details towards the end. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And remember from your video that you watched last week from the, not Dawn Night, but the teacher from Nebraska who talked about 3 different ways that you include evidence in your rhetorical analysis essay. You can give direct quotes, you can paraphrase, or summarize, right? Summarize is just like, it's a letter about, it's a letter that he writes to try to prevent Warner Brothers from suing him. That's sort of a summary. Paraphrasing is where you're taking some of the words and putting them into your own words, right? He uses a fake reference to the Warner Brothers family history. He makes, a ridiculous analogy comparing Harpo Marx to Ingrid Bergman. And then he sets up with a series of rhetorical questions, making Jack Warner realize that, if I think that I can claim Casablanca as a title, do I really think that I can claim possession of language in general, like brothers and Jack and Harry, right? So that would be sort of putting it into your own words. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right, so this is one example of the essay that you can write on Friday. So we've done Dr. Raina Green's speech, Queen Elizabeth I speech, Joan Didion's essay on Santa Ana Winds, and Marx Brothers' letter to Warner Brothers. By the end of the week, we'll do Chris Morley's on laziness and Ralph Ellison's on bird talk, and you can choose from those to write your essay from. All right.